Hello, Ordinary Joes. I want to give you a quick new studio tour because you're not going to see this studio until episode 20. So we've got a long way to go before we get there. But there was an evolution of studios, as you've already seen through episode 1, 2, and 3. So the first two, I thought my studio was going to be in the garage. That didn't work out so well for background noise and for seasonal temperatures. Then I moved into our guest bedroom, which is where our computer was. We've moved that now since. Then we moved into the hookah lounge. You're going to see all of this, and that's a whole nother story that I'll tell you later down the line too. But for right now, check it out. So we moved the couch in here from the garage. We cleaned it before we moved it, don't worry. I wish I could give you a wider shot, but yeah. This is the new studio. The guests sit here, I sit here, and we just have a conversation. Yeah, so this is what I'll see as we record. This is what the guests will see as we record. This isn't going to look like this for long. I just barely moved all my stuff in here. I've got to get it set up and organized. I did one episode in here, but you know, we got to decorate the walls. We got to bring some stuff in here, make it a little more lively. But yeah, so this is the new studio. Now, I'm going to record a quick new thing that's going to be happening. All right. And record. Okay. If you do hear the fan, I apologize in advance. That's not going to be a usual thing. Normally I'll have the door shut and whatnot, but this is just a new thing I'm trying out for you guys. So I want to do a little housekeeping. I stole that from another podcast. Don't judge me. I like it, so I'm going to use it. I want to just go over a few things for not only the video viewers, but also the audio listeners, since you're not seeing a few of the things that are happening in the episodes that need a little bit more audio context. So let's start and go episode by episode of what's out, and I will cover a couple episodes that aren't out yet, because you will be hearing those very soon. So first of all, I want to talk about the podcast itself, and you will hear this again later on and down the line, but I started this podcast originally with a different name. I thought of this podcast in 2017, 2018, and I was going to call it Extraordinary Joes, because we're all extraordinary in our own little ways. Well, what happened was, by the time I actually got episodes recorded, by the time I actually got my first couple episodes edited and ready to post, the night that I was gonna release the next morning, okay, let me backtrack. When I originally thought of my concept for Extraordinary Joes, my concept was I'm gonna have ordinary people on here telling me their extraordinary stories and what makes them extraordinary. So that was my concept. Well, I Googled it, I got on Spotify and checked, I got all over the place and tried to see if I could find if that existed. And I wasn't able to find anything that existed. So I was like, cool, I have an original thought, an idea here, and I'm going to continue with that original thought and idea. So I started the Extraordinary Joes podcast. I came up with a logo. I came up with sort of a catchphrase. I came up with this whole thing. And through these episodes, you're going to hear a lot of choppy, cutty parts in the audio. And in the video, you'll see just abrupt endings to my sentences and stuff. That's because of the Extraordinary Joes. Well, fast forward in time to when I was about to release, I thought, you know what? I better double check and make sure nobody's posted under this yet. I Googled it. And what do you know? There's an Extraordinary Joes podcast on Spotify. Not only is there an Extraordinary Joes podcast, but it's identical to my entire concept. Obviously, his cover art was a little bit different, and his guests, to be honest, I don't think are ordinary enough. They're not average everyday people. So he's got like a pro basketball player. He's got people who aren't as ordinary as the people that I would be having on my podcast. So, but that's neither here nor there. He came up with the concept. He posted before I did, and as a matter of fact, by the time I found him, he already had 100 and some episodes already posted, listed. So I got a hold of him, let him know the situation, asked if it would be okay if I called mine The Extraordinary Joes or An Extraordinary Joes podcast. He was perfectly fine with that. He's a really nice guy, but I didn't want to cop his style, and I graciously bowed out and let him have that. I was on the brink of quitting and just saying, screw it, I can't do this. Sarah and I started brainstorming, and she came up with Ordinary Joe's Extraordinary Stories, which by all accounts fits my podcast better than Extraordinary Joe's, because yes, we're all extraordinary in our own ways, but some people just have stories that make them extraordinary, and I liked that the name that she came up with reflects that. They are just average, everyday, ordinary people like all of us, me, you, everybody, but they have extraordinary stories. So that name actually fits a lot better. So she came up with a quick cover art, she came up with the name, and I got back on it and I posted. So that brings us to now at the current time of recording, there's 3 episodes released, there's 4 episodes scheduled, and I have a total of 20 episodes recorded, and I've got another 3-4 this week. So I'm trying to get caught up far enough on the editing that I can start releasing weekly. And I need to get at least, 6-7 episodes ahead of release before I can start scheduling and releasing weekly. And that means I also need to get people on my schedule to record more future episodes. That brings us up to date. I just do want to real quickly say that in a lot of these episodes, you're going to hear me say that I want to do this again with these people. I fully intend on having a round 2 with the majority, if not all of them, because as this podcast progresses, I find myself getting lost in changing topics so quickly that I lose topics and I get carried away and I interrupt people, and I apologize for all this in advance. I'm trying to get better, but we end up recording these episodes and don't talk about a lot of the topics that I wanted to talk about in the beginning. Now, that brings me to another point. I don't script at all this podcast. It's kind of just a natural conversation, and I wanted it to continue as a natural conversation podcast. I don't want to interview these people, which brings me to another thing I wanted to talk about, episode 3, Scott Derigny. I originally recorded that as an interview style podcast for a different, I'm an airplane geek, obviously, if you know me at all. And I recorded that one as a part of a community for 2 other podcasts that are airplane related that I listen to. And I'm hoping to get a member from each of those podcasts on my podcast sometime down the line. One of them is for sure going to happen. The other one I haven't really communicated with the guy, but I fully intend on it. Now, I originally recorded episode 3 for those podcasts, and those were released long ago. But I also thought, this is a great part of my recording past, so I want to have that on my podcast too. So that's why I released it as one of my podcasts. Now, episode 1 was originally recorded as episode 1. That was my second attempt at podcasting. Episode 3 was my very first episode that I recorded, but episode 1 was the very first attempt at recording for this podcast. And I will say Papa was very nervous, and he didn't let his true personality shine. So we need to go back and have another episode. And to that note, one housekeeping item for that episode was he didn't really laugh about it because he was nervous, but I said something about I did that in Hatch or saw that in Hatch and it was no good. That was an inside joke. Papo likes to say, when you talk about a new movie or something, he says, I saw that in Hatch, it was no good. So that was an inside joke. So if you thought it was insulting or rude of me, I apologize. That's what it was. It was just an inside joke. And I'm hoping the next time I have him on here, he's a little more comfortable and we can back and forth with those jokes. We have a few of them. So that was episode 1. Episode 2 with Sarah and I. That was my second attempt at a recording for this podcast, and I think we did good. She doesn't like being on camera. She doesn't like recording, but she got past all that to sit there with me and record. And you will see episode 6 is her sort of leading a conversation with me for this podcast. Episode 6, you get to hear me tell some stories. So look out for that. There's no real housekeeping I need for episodes aside from a couple times I talked about, instead of referring to our travel agent as a travel agent, I said I can't remember what I said, but I didn't refer to her as a travel agent, but she was our travel agent. And again, I wanted to just reiterate that she was fantastic, and all the guides that she set us up with in Egypt were fantastic people, and I still communicate with a few of them regularly. So if you want any of those recommendations, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be glad to give you all of their names and put you in contact with them so you can plan a trip to Egypt, because it's unlike anything you've ever done before. Epic. Okay, to that note, if you want to see our trip to Egypt, I recorded most of it and it's over on my Master of None channel. That's MASTR-OF-NONE. Master of None. And I'll put a link right here. I also have a second channel, which is all about cars and garage stuff. And if you want to check that out, that's the Toy Box Garage. And yes, it's misspelled with 2 B's, a lowercase b and then a large B. That's because the box that I'm referring to in that title is my Scion XB, which in Japan, the original version is a Toyota BB. And that's how it is. It's a small b with a capital B after. So that's why it's Toy BB Ox Garage. So I'll link that right here. Okay, now that that's all out of the way, I've discussed episode 3, Scott, why I originally recorded it for another podcast, but why I posted it here. Again, episode 1 and 2, you'll notice we're in the garage. That was my first studio. Second studio was the spare room right across the hall here, our guest room. That was episode 3, 4, 5, and 6. Episode 6, real quick, the one where Sarah interviews me, is audio only. So I'm trying to put up pictures or something for that one so you can see what I'm talking about, but you won't see Sarah and I. Episode 7 is the first episode that's recorded in the hookah lounge. And I will continue this conversation about the evolution of the studio on my next housekeeping video, which I don't know when it's going to happen. Let's go to episode 4, Rani Ahumada, which is coming out next week. Next Wednesday, not this Wednesday. I'm recording this on July 8th. Rani episode 4 is coming out July 17th. Be on the lookout for that. I don't think I have any housekeeping for Rani right now. If I do, I'll talk about it in the next episode. There is some housekeeping I have for future episodes, but I'm not going to give them away. I just do, again, want to say that when you hear and see the video all chopped up and hear abrupt endings to my words and sentences, that's because I cut out Extraordinary Joe's and associated wording to Extraordinary Joe's from those episodes, and you'll see it a lot. Now, I'm getting better about it, but to the audio only listeners, when you're hearing this, there's going to be some beeps, some record scratches, some other random noises that you hear in the episodes that cut words off that we're saying. That's because there's a correction in the video, so you can either go over to the video to watch it or stay in tune to a future housekeeping episode, and I will cover on those episodes why those were in there and what the corrections were for those themes. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. Share the podcast with your friends. Let's get this thing going. I'm going to start releasing some shorts for it to try and get some more attention to the podcast, but share it with your friends. Start a conversation in the comments below so we can get community engagement, and be on the lookout for a lot more episodes. The podcast gets significantly better because I learned a lot, and I have some crazy stories coming out with some crazy, the guests aren't crazy, they're ordinary Joes, but they have some crazy stories and some very interesting stuff to talk about. So please stay tuned, and I'll see you on the next one, which will be July 17th, episode 4, Rani Ahumada. Be on the lookout. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.